Hi, I am so happy to be here today. It was such an honor to be invited by Brenda, so thank you. My personal thanks on that. My name is Cynthia Moynihan. I have lived in Nashville, Tennessee, very long time, but I was born on the West Coast, and we eventually moved to Nashville. And then I was married for a long time with two children, and we basically raised the children in Florida. Later, now they're both out on their own, and I was able to come back home to Nashville to be with family and friends here. Well, they say that I was born with the hearing loss, and I have two genetic chromosomes that are the result of me not being able to hear. They found my hearing loss in third grade, and they did a test at the school. And then they called my parents and said that they thought something was wrong with the test because I was a good student. What was happening is I have a cookie bite loss, and a cookie bite loss is kind of unique in the sense that you have low, medium, and high sounds. And the cookie bite loss is predominantly in the mid-range. And that's where all of your communication is. So when they first found it, it was not bad. It was like low. And then later it progressed. By the time I was in middle school, my mid-range was around 55. And then by the time I was in high school, my mid-range was around 60 or 70. And later in life, I eventually lost my low and my high as well. So about the last 20 years, I have been what I would say is deaf, because my low, medium, and high is across the board very, very low in the 90s or hundreds. And so even with the hearing aid on, I was only hearing about 22%. In 2019, I obtained my first cochlear implant. So I had the surgery, I was activated, and I have been embracing more of the hearing world for the first time since then. Yes, I grew up in Nashville. Yes, it was different back in the day whenever I was growing up with my hearing loss. There was not as much out there about it, but there was Vanderbilt and the Bill Wilkerson Center. And my mother at one point was driving me across town so that I could possibly attend sign language classes. And the interesting thing is back in the day, sign language was not quite as accepted in the hearing world like it is today. Today, everybody wants to learn sign language. They appreciate the beauty of the language, and it's just amazing to see all that out there today. When I was growing up, I think some people were maybe uncomfortable and didn't understand if they were deaf and they communicated with American Sign Language. They were confused by someone who was operating more in a hearing world and naturally learning to lip read. You know, I look back on school and I quite honestly do not know how I did it. But I do hear that story from others as well. I mainstreamed all the way through high school. And then I went to college. And then several years later, I went back and got my MBA from Belmont College. But while I was in school, what did happen was in elementary school, I did okay because it was a pretty controlled environment. And I was naturally learning to lip read, only I didn't know I was. So in middle school, when I started middle school, I'm engaged with all this conversation in a broader world. And so I felt like my hearing loss was diminishing. And in reality, what was happening is the conversation was getting much more broad and multiple conversations coming my way. And it was taking a longer time for me to lip read, to process, and to understand. It's a fascinating story that my mother took me to my pediatrician in 7th grade. And I was sharing at that time about my concerns about my hearing loss, and I felt like I wasn't able to be engaged with people like I wanted to. And he said, I'm going to ask you a question. I said, I'm going to put my hand over my mouth and I'm going to ask you a question. So he put his hand over his mouth. He asked the question. I had no clue what it was. Then he put his hand down and he asked the question again. And his question was, what color are your eyes? Or my eyes? What color are his eyes? The doctor's eyes, not mine. I know mine. At any rate, so whenever he asked that question, I had to look up because I had been staring at his mouth to understand what was being said. So he told me at that point to make certain that I practiced and continued to practice lip reading, but to maintain eye contact while I did so. That was a miracle. I mean, the odds of that happening, I think, are slim. I was very blessed. So I immediately realized, okay, this is what's happening. I'm actually lip reading. And then I knew from that point on to pay more attention to the whole face, to have eye contact. Then in high school, my hearing loss dropped again. I was still able to I did basketball, I did volleyball. I was in advanced classes. They called them AP classes, and I think they still do that today. Then I was able to get accepted to college, and I went to Indiana University. It was while I was there that my hearing really started to bottom out, and it started to bottom out in the low and the highs as well. So I asked for help and I asked to get into special classes. And the school counselors basically felt that I was bored and that all I needed to do was take more classes and I would be okay. Needless to say, that was not the solution to my problem. I was sitting in a classroom with 450 students. The teacher, the professor was walking back and forth, and I was missing out on everything. So I came back home, came to Nashville, and I was out of school for a short spell while they were doing testing to assess what was wrong. And that's whenever they discovered that they felt it was genetic, and they actually expected me to go deaf by 21, but that did not happen. My hearing kind of held in there a little bit longer. I was still able to graduate in 4 years. I just transitioned to Belmont. I had the smaller classes, but I did not have assistance. I was not aware of that option. Had I been, I definitely would have taken advantage of it. But I was able to sit in the classrooms and lip read and work with the students, and I was able to graduate with honors. Several years later, Belmont introduced their MBA program, and I was honored to be asked to be a part and the first graduating class for that program. So I did that while I was working full time. So I would work and then I would go to school, and I did that for 2 years and graduated. Again, that was all without assistance, but I was realizing by then as well that my hearing was really impacting me on the job. I was finding that from a work standpoint, that I could not always keep up with what was being said and asked of me, that my fellow coworkers and my boss, they would get disappointed with the things that I would miss. I think they were very confused because I could speak so well and because I didn't look like I had a hearing loss. So they would repeatedly forget that I had one. And I think I myself was working so hard to mainstream and to stay mainstreamed that I wasn't advocating for myself enough. So that combination was leading me to be very, very concerned about what my future would be and my ability to continue to work and my ability to continue to be engaged in the world, because I love interacting with other people. I love socializing. I love learning new things. And I was realizing that even what I was learning was diminishing because I wasn't capturing everything that was being said. And I wanted to learn by visual and by audio. And that was going away. So whenever I graduated with my MBA, I was able to continue to work, but I started taking different jobs where I wasn't doing as much and my pay scale wasn't like it used to be. And then I got married, and then I had children that I wasn't planning on, but wouldn't change a thing. I'm so grateful for two fabulous boys. One is now a Marine and the other is working in IT. And I learned a lot more even through that with my family, that with working with my children, I had to find a way to be able to stay in their world while dealing with my hearing loss. And I think it was about that time that I was realizing I needed a lot more than what I had been given growing up. My mother was instrumental in so much and always educating me that you have to go out to the world. The world does not come to you. You have to make things happen. What my mother and my family was not aware of was other resources that I might have had access to. So by the time I was having my own children, I was realizing I really need to get out there and find what's available, because I'm going to lose my ability to connect with my own children. That's whenever I found the Deaf Center. I was down in Florida by then with the children, but found the Deaf Center down there. And I started going with the children. I signed up for sign language classes. I became engaged with hearing loss organizations, support groups, discovered the Hearing Loss Association of America, which was SHHH back in the day. And it opened up the reality of my own hearing loss, what I was able to accomplish despite the odds, and my desire to make certain that other people would not be as in the dark as I was about hearing loss. So I'm very grateful to fast forward to today, where there is so much more awareness, so many opportunities. Technology has kept up with me to where I have a cochlear implant, and I am actually back in the hearing world, but I also know that I'm deaf. I can put my cochlear implant on, and that gets me in the hearing world. But when I take it off, I'm deaf. And I remain, it's an ultimate goal for me to always, always be engaged with the deaf, the hard of hearing, and the hearing if I'm able, and having respect for all of those worlds and understanding how complex it is. It's never as simple as it appears. Repeat that. I definitely classify myself as late deafened, definitely. Okay. So, and I like to say late deafened because there is a difference with my very dear friends that are born deaf there is a difference between being born deaf and having a hearing loss and going deaf. So I think that feels most comfortable and respectful for the people dealing with hearing loss, the deaf and the late deafened.
I had a question.
That is the Master's of Business Administration. So yeah, so, and I did it in management, right?
Business.
And business, right,
Okay.
right. Well, what happened was, is I found that I was doing more work that I could kind of shuffle around. I did things like I would do rental properties, and I would help people. This was back in the day where it's not like today where it's very simple process, but back in the day to help develop with websites and outreach. And that was a lot that I could do from home. And I could rely on email with correspondence with renters. And so I didn't have to worry about being on the phone quite as much. When I did, and I was on the phone, I was using my caption phone. So I have everything set up from home. That way I could be there for my children. I could be there for my family, and I was able to work. And I was able to deal with my hearing loss, but it was not without its struggles. It was actually quite difficult at times. And especially if I was on the road or having to do something, and then I had to find a way to still stay connected and be engaged. So that was difficult. Later, then I did do substitute teaching periodically as well. And I found very quickly that I loved teaching with a passion. Always have. I love being around children. But I realized I was very concerned about being in a classroom and a child might bring up something that's very important that might not even be related to school, but their personal life. And I might miss it, and a child might only say it one time. So I was not comfortable with wanting to continue with the long-term, like becoming a teacher. That was one of my passions back in the day. But I was able to substitute teach. And then I would be able to explain to the children up front that I had the hearing loss. We would be able to do what we needed to do, and then they would help me. So like if the phone rang in the classroom, the child could answer the phone and talk with the front office and things like that. So later on though, now with the cochlear implant, one of the big reasons for getting the cochlear implant is because the children were out of the house and I was divorced and I needed a different type of environment to sustain myself. And so it became paramount to be able to make certain that I could hear. So I still did prior to getting the cochlear implant. I was working with another business, though I did the website and I did marketing and I did outreach. And again, a lot of people appreciated the fact that I could communicate so well, but the fatigue and the drain and my own personal frustration was just becoming paramount that I realized I needed to do something. So then I got the cochlear implant, and that reintroduced me to the world. In between all of that, I have done volumes of volunteer work, always have. That's a passion of mine as well. So my work and my education and my volunteering all led to what I'm doing now, which is consulting work.
That's great. So now you're working.
Yeah, that was actually something that I did in the past that I'm not doing now. But yes, what I did is it actually started with contacts that I had, and they knew me on a personal basis, and they loved my style. They loved my creativity. They loved my entrepreneur type passion. So they would approach me and say, hey, I'm looking at more outreach, or I would like to design a website, or I would like to, and then I would say, I'm not sure how much experience I have, but I'm willing to try. So I self-educated myself in a lot of those things. And then I would come back and I would say, here's what I can do for you. Then it would pass on by word of mouth to others. And it would be like, and then I reviewed their contracts and revised those. I did the websites. I did the rate rental balancing. I did all of the book work. I did reaching out and making sure that we had immediate contacts for all of the maintenance. So if it was electrical or plumbing or cleaning or whatever it was in the event, like especially with cleaning, if a cleaning person did not show, then I would drive out there and get it cleaned and get it ready for the next renter. And I built very strong relations with the renters because this was all vacation rental. So the vacation rentals, they would come once, they would like the style, we personalized it, had a lot of things that made a difference. And it was wonderful because they would eventually find out that I had the hearing loss. And they wanted to learn more about hearing loss because they were always so impressed at how well. And I found it kind of interesting that they thought that I wouldn't be able to succeed like I was simply because of a hearing loss, not because I couldn't hear, but because it's a sign of disability. And that implies that you might not be as smart, or you might not be as creative, or you might not be as knowledgeable, or you might not be as engaging or fun as someone who's hearing. So it was enlightening to the people that I worked with and the relationships that I developed from that, to help them understand that, you know, we're just like anybody else.
Okay. Big time working with other
Involved with other organizations, like from the business side or from volunteer side, or both.
yeah. Oh,
That because they kind of actually overlap, because a lot of what I do now is working with nonprofits. And my experience has led to some great opportunities in sharing ideas and working with others. As far as with other organizations, especially since I came back to Nashville. But I am engaged with organizations all around the country. They're all tied to hearing loss and communication in general in some way, but not all. So like an example is, we recently did the Say What Club convention here in Nashville. It was a great opportunity to bring people that are dealing with hearing loss or late deafened or deaf to come and embrace the convention here, learn more about Nashville, and to also work as a group and be able to explore. So we went to the library, the downtown library where we're at right now, and had the tour. And everyone was so amazed with the library, by the way. It is the best kept secret in Nashville. Then we did the Grand Ole Opry. We did the tours downtown Nashville, like the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Ryman Auditorium, going over to the Farmers Market and Bicentennial. With all of those, I also build relations. So I have relations with a lot of those businesses here in town. And I have relations with organizations like the cochlear implant manufacturers, the representatives for all three, the hearing aid manufacturers and the representatives for the different hearing aid manufacturers that are out there, for all the assisted listening devices, all those different organizations, in addition to just general mainstream. So like Vanderbilt, St. Thomas, other local hospitals and facilities around the area, whenever we're trying to help make and raise awareness about someone who comes in with a hearing loss or is deaf and needs communication access, working with the Bridges for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, working with other volunteer groups like Hearing Loss Association of America, the Association of Late Deafened Adults, the Say What Club or the SWC, and with the library here and helping out whenever I possibly can, which is part of the reason why I'm here right now. So that list goes on with Tai Chi, with exercise facilities, with marketing outreach, with different religious affiliations and church organizations. So it's pretty broad. It's pretty broad.
Okay. Can you stand architecture?
Yes, yes. For
say what?
it's yeah, it's more like with I started with HLAA. I started with HLAA. So at the time that was SHHH. And then they changed the name in '84. So at any rate, so with the SHHH, I started out just to get help for myself. So that was the only organization I was familiar with. So I immediately joined, I got the newsletter. I started learning about all these people around the country that had hearing loss. But I did not go to any of the conventions at that time. Later, they switched the name to HLAA, the Hearing Loss Association of America. That particular organization is also, it's a nonprofit, but it does have a paid staff. That's the one organization that does have a paid staff out of the DC area. So they are active with our politicians and advocating on behalf of individuals dealing with hearing loss. The reason that SHHH, later HLAA, was beneficial for me is because I was not deaf at that time. So there were support groups and organizations for the deaf, but I didn't fit in that world, especially back then. So that's why I was with HLAA, and HLA was specifically designed at the time, and all that's changing now, but at the time it was designed by Rocky Stone, who started it because he was seeing a need for people that didn't fall in the hearing world and didn't fall in the deaf world that needed help. So later, I became very actively involved. I was on boards, I was involved with chapters. I did the first statewide Let's Make Hearing Loss Visible extravaganza, a lot of different things that really came to life. And it also taught me my own potential at what I could do. I was challenged to keep stepping into new things related to volunteering that I hadn't done in the past. And some things were a little overwhelming up front, but then I very quickly realized that, you know, the reason that challenge was placed before me was so I could learn. And everything that I have done, especially from the volunteer side, is always with other people. It is never alone. It's always working with your team, the other people around you, you know, working together that makes the difference. So later, I then was introduced to, because I went deaf, I was really losing my hearing, I was going deaf, and I was realizing that HLAA was helpful, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't reaching into where I was headed, which was late deafened. So I had some friends who introduced me to the Association of Late Deafened Adults. And they actually, I was going through a very difficult time, said, we want to make sure you come to a convention. We're going to take you. You're going to embrace the family. It's going to be fabulous. And the next thing I knew, I embraced that family. Then I was on that board. Then I was just as heavily involved in helping with conventions and outreach and embracing that late deafened life. Then I was introduced to the Say What Club. And the Say What Club is very similar to the Association of Late Deafened Adults, and yet it's uniquely different because number one, it's not just late deafened adults, it's people with hearing loss. Number two, they do more hands-on with groups where you can join and talk online by way of email if you have, if you're interested about a cochlear implant, or you've just discovered that you have a hearing loss and you have questions and you want support, that there's email correspondence. So the groups actively engage together and you can basically connect anytime, send an email and see what kind of responses you get, what comes back. With ALDA, that is specifically for 18 and over. So anybody who is an adult that is late deafened is welcome to join the organization. It does also include deaf individuals, and they have chapters. They have fabulous chapters and organizations in each of their 4 regions. So with ALDA, they have region 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can look on their website and you can see what those regions cover. But it's basically region 1 is like the Northeast, region 2 is like the Southeast and kind of across the middle there. And then region 3 and 4 are respectively on the other coast. So the chapters and groups that they have are hands-on. They are also doing virtual meetings so that if you cannot attend an actual meeting, that you are periodically able to join in and do so virtually. And then they host a convention just like Say What Club does, and ALDA and HLA. All 3 organizations have a convention. And the convention, the HLAA, is typically in June. The Say What Club is typically in August. And the ALDA group, or the ALDA Incorporated, is typically in October or November. So.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I think the challenges, if I'm being very honest, are ongoing all the time. So, but as far as big challenges, I think the first was realizing that I needed to stay engaged with people even when I wasn't comfortable doing so. And I needed to keep that connection because that was my lifeline for my future, for my education, for my friends, for my family. It was kind of critical. But at the same time, it was excruciatingly challenging. And the fatigue would set in and the depression would set in. And there would be times whenever I just didn't want to wake up in the morning and have to face another day. And I learned that I needed to make myself keep going forward and also to give myself pity pot time. So I learned how to give myself 24-hour pity pot time. And when I needed that break to breathe and to catch my breath, to be able to do that. Of course, it wasn't always a choice. I didn't always have that luxury. There were times when I had to get off the pity pot before the 24 hours was up. But that was one. Having to leave Indiana University and realizing that I was in a whole other world, and one that was going to be very challenging. And going to Belmont and then having to work so hard to still graduate on time. And I was working while I was going to school. So I was very focused on the education and the work and doing what I could. It was very difficult from a social perspective to be interacting with the students, and I would watch the laughter and the camaraderie and everything that was taking place and realizing that I couldn't necessarily be a part of that. The irony is everybody around me always says, my gosh, you are always so upbeat. You are always so great. And we remember all these great things with you. And they didn't realize what I was feeling inside. They didn't realize that. I also had some very bad experiences with people knowing that I had a disability, and I was attacked. And it took a long time to finally talk about it and to share what happened. And it was someone I knew. And I slowly overcame that. That was another big one, that I realized that I needed the support, I needed counseling, I needed the connection. But the problem is even with counseling, that I needed to be able to understand and communicate. And there was complexity in that. So the other obstacles that I found the most challenging, refreshing later in life was raising my children and dealing with my hearing loss. And I made sure they were both extremely instrumental in the music world. They're both fabulous singers, actors, whatever. They're really good. That was hard, but I made sure it happened. And when I started the volunteer side and I realized that I had some really fabulous ideas and opportunities and some great people to work with. And I also learned the hard way that when I joined my first board from a hearing loss side, strictly working with hearing loss individuals and trying to help them, that I literally felt that I could make everyone happy. And I learned that that is not the case. That doesn't happen. But I can make certain that I work with everybody else, that we continue to educate, that we have patience, that we identify the resources that can make a difference, and just take it one small step at a time, that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I learned with when we all of a sudden were given a 4,000 square foot facility to put a hearing loss expo together, single day, and it was free, but we had 4 months to put it together. I really did not see how I could do that. And the next thing I know, I had all these people around me that worked with me, and they're like, you can do this with one hand behind your back. This is going to be outstanding. It's going to be great. And I'm like, well, you know what? If they believe in it, then, and I'm the one that's always telling them when someone says that they are telling you to go for it, try it. I had to eat my own words and I had to go for it. I had to try it. And so I learned at that stage, people came up to me later and said it was one of the best they had ever been to. We won an award for it. And people were coming up and saying, you realize how this came about? And I said, no. And they were like, it's because you already had a reputation. You already had all the contacts. You already had the reputation of being trustworthy and reliable. They know you're coming from the heart. They know the people that you want to work with are coming from the heart. And so all these organizations, I did not realize, like even with some of them, to get approval to sponsor an event can take 6 months. Well, we didn't even start looking for sponsors until we had 2 months left before it was going live. And we got every sponsor, and we had a fabulous outreach, and we expanded it. We made sure that it was about not just people with hearing loss, but hearing family members and friends. Because the next big obstacle was the message to be that if you hear about a hearing loss or late deafen or deaf convention, and someone turns to you and says, you should go to that, It's like, no, we should go to that. And that became a focal point, that with our Let's Make Hearing Loss Visible extravaganza was as much about reaching out to people dealing with any level of hearing loss, as well as their hearing families and friends, because it's truly about a village. And I get teary-eyed right now, even I found my village.
What are your words?
Just words, like simple
Like the word
opportunity,
yeah.
opportunity,
Just
opportunity,
yeah.
opportunity. I mean, I can't say it. That is the word that I use with everything, with the workshops that I do. I do workshops on opportunity. I do, because really it's the hearing loss is just a small part of you. If you are deaf, late deafened, hard of hearing, that is just a part of who you are. But that does not take away from opportunities in life. Reach out, engage, village. Do not do it alone. We are not meant to be alone. We are meant to engage with others. Pity pot time. Respect it and own it. You're going to get tired. You're going to not always be in that top-notch happy smile mode. Nobody is. Hearing people aren't. Hearing people have learned the hard way with COVID just how difficult life can be. And so, yeah, so that's what I would say. And advocate, 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 advocate.
Like